pre-product, you have to click anything on the screen. So if you're pre-product, basically, you don't have a product in the market already. What you're going to be likely doing customer discovery for is identifying who might be your ideal customer profiles. You might want to start to come up with some ideas for what your features might be, and maybe even prioritizing some of those features that you might have an idea for through doing customer discovery interviews. And you might have some early mock-ups or designs in the back of a napkin, and it's a good chance for you, before you build the product, to actually get some feedback on your designs. Let's click it. Oh, maybe here. Oh, there we go. Cool. That's a good team effort. And then when you're in the validation stage, so let's say that you have a product launched into the market already, and you're looking to validate whether that product fits with the market. Essentially, you're doing beta testing, right, with these customer discovery interviews. And you might want to iterate on the features that you've launched because they may or may not be meeting the expectations of your users. And actually, this could be your opportunity to actually start lead generation, right? Because you're involving them, you have something solid to put in front of them. You can actually say, hey, would you be interested to sign up when we have a product that you can actually use? And then lastly, and I think this is often missed, or people don't often think about this, but actually customer discovery can be a great way to test your go-to-market strategy. You can actually get back to the same people that you talked to get feedback early on and start testing your marketing messaging with them, right? So, would this phrase work for you? Would the value proposition this way, capture your attention? Would you buy it? How much would you pay? And essentially get the feedback on the final product that you're about to put into the market. So all this is to say, you can do and talk to your customers at any time. It's just a different context. It's just a different conversation. So don't feel like you have to wait, or don't feel like you have to get things more refined. Actually, it's in your best interest to actually involve them as early as you can. Oh, this doesn't work. Let me progress the slide. Last step, then you stop, and then you start again. But actually, it should just be a cycle that you go through as you're building your product, the same way that you're releasing new features and new enhancements to your product. So I wanted to summarize just a few key things that I think are important and things that should be considered in the recruitment stage. So first of all, you got to find your users, obviously. But my recommendation is actually to not just focus on your current customers, because your current customers. So let's say that you've gathered like a list of people who signed up to your landing page, and now you're getting feedback from them. That's great, because these are the people that you caught their attention for. But don't stop there. Actually try to find your competitors' customers. Talk to them about why they're using your competitors, and what brought them to the competitors, and what led to that choice, right? And then actually think about some criteria that could actually lead to someone being a potential customer. So even you've got your current customers who signed up, who are interested, but what about others that could potentially be of interest to you as well, that are not currently signed up or are maybe not using your product right now? Come up with some hypotheses on what those criteria might be. And then from there, another dimension that you could look at is, how do you find those same people, but maybe in other markets? So maybe it's the same set of customers that you're currently talking to or are using your product, but maybe in a different country or maybe in a different industry that might share the same behaviors as some of your current customers, right? So those are like kind of 4 angles that you can actually use to expand the learnings beyond just the few that you might have as your current customers or current database right now. And then from there, you got to screen them based on the criteria that you think would make sense based on the product that you're selling. So typically what happens in this stage is you would develop a screener that qualifies whether or not they match with your target criteria or not. And special call out here is that screener should not have any yes or no questions on there at all, because that would just bias the answers that you would get. And then you would essentially have to determine how many people you want to interview. And typically in the industry, we typically want to interview as many people as it takes until the learning stops, right? So let's say you interview the first person, second person, third person, fourth person. You're getting new information each time. That probably means you still need to do it until you're starting to hear the same things and you feel like doing more would not help. And usually that maxes out at around 8 people, given that you've segmented your customers based on the criteria correctly. And then the last one is, I've heard this a lot as well, where you reach out to people, you ask them to come and interview with you, but they don't show up or they don't actually sign up to join your session. That's probably because you haven't really articulated enough the value of why they should actually care and why they should come. And there's a few ways that you can attract them with value. One is really, as a startup, the ability for them to actually help you build cutting-edge technology. And that's something that not everyone has that benefit of doing on a daily basis. And that can be really enticing. On Lightster, this is in fact one of the #1 reasons why people join our platform, is the ability to work with cutting-edge technology. You can provide them with exclusive access to your platform. People like to be the first. People like to know about things that others don't. And then the last one is cash incentives, which is a very standard way to provide value for their time from them being involved. So having said that, just an example that I wanted to show for a screener, and actually I've got this question asked a lot in terms of like, how should I structure these screening criteria and how should I articulate it? I think this is probably like the most straightforward way to show how this can be simplified. But let's say that you're working on a used car platform and you're looking for people who have experience renting cars. So now going back to like no yes or no questions, it wouldn't be a good idea to ask people, have you rented cars before, yes or no? Or would you rent a car, yes or no? Because people will just say yes, just so that they can get in on whatever you're providing them in terms of value. But actually you want to broaden that a little bit, and this will take you more time to get the right people, but you will know that the answers are more truthful and are more reliable. But you want to ask things like, which of these have you rented in the past 6 months, right? Like you're giving them a time frame, but then at the same time, while you're looking for people who have rented cars in the last 6 months, you're giving them other options like home, computing equipment, skates, what have you. Throw that all in there and see what the responses are. And of course, you're only going to pick the ones that shows cars. So the key things here is, don't give information in your question about the answer that you're looking for. So don't mention cars in there. And then make sure that all your answers are all viable answers. So also don't put things that people wouldn't typically rent in there, right? People will find that out right away. So that's just an example. And now you got to do the interviews. So first step is you got to develop a discussion guide, right? So what do you want to learn, and how do you want to capture that? So I would recommend starting off with how much time you have and how much time you actually want to kind of time box it into, and then come up with an agenda with time allocations for each. This will help make sure that, because you're going to be doing a lot of these interviews over time, it helps you make sure that you're asking the same questions consistently to all the participants, so that the knowledge that you get are actually going to be comparable across the participants. It also makes sure that you don't spend too much time. And if you've done interviews before, you'll know some people will talk a lot, some people will talk less. It helps you make sure that you get through to all the questions so that you get consistent information from each person. Then you want to brainstorm the questions, and also oftentimes some follow-ups to those questions, right? So let's say you, in the car rental platform example, let's say you ask people what brands they choose. You might want to just have some follow-up questions on why did you choose those brands? What influenced your decision? Those types of things. So anticipate what follow-ups you might need in addition to those questions. And then include some ground rules for the users as well. So sometimes users are also new to this interview process, and so you should let them know as well that they can speak out their minds openly. There's no right or wrong question, just so that they get comfortable with the conversation and are not nervous, in that kind of setting where you're interviewing them and grilling them for information. And then the second part is, I also recommend everyone to record the session. And of course, you need to ask permission from the participants to get this done. But the benefit of recording the session is that during the interview, you can really focus on the conversation. You don't have to worry about writing down notes, because you know that you can come back to it later. The other benefit is you can also share it with your team, or share it with your investors, share it with your colleagues, so that information is now kind of shareable to others. And yeah, the last thing you want to do is telling them to pause and you're writing down notes. And then the last part is really just focus on the conversation. So listen to what they say and avoid interruptions. So a lot of times, let's say they said something that you really were excited for because it aligns with what you're thinking. Just avoid yourself going in and be like, yes, I agree, and just really, really introduce that kind of confirmation bias into the conversation, right? Because at that point, now the user knows that that's what you want to hear, and then they might just keep talking about that topic over and over. And yeah, avoid interruptions. You never know what they will say, and so oftentimes I recommend just keep listening to them. You never know what they will bring up that you might not even have even thought about asking them. And another thing to keep in mind, and I see people do this all the time too, is asking questions that are putting words in their mouth, right? So don't say things like, so you would use this, right? Or so this is how you would pick a car, because that you're basically introducing your bias into their minds, and they might just be inclined to say yes, right? Just because you said that. So avoid interrupting in those kind of manners. So here's an example of an agenda. So let's say that you're the same platform, right, the car rental platform, and you're looking to interview users to get an understanding of their pain points and also generate ideas on how you could make your platform better for them. So recommend starting with an introduction segment so that the user can warm up to the conversation and they know a bit more about what you're looking for in that conversation as well, to kind of frame properly. Problem identification. So here, without talking solutions, without talking about tools or anything, get an understanding of what the problems are, right? Ask them about the problems, how and why they're running into those problems, and maybe ask them to rank how painful the problems are, right, within the first 15 minutes. And then from there, you want to get into an understanding of their current state. So understanding, well, given that they run into these problems, what are they doing today to solve those problems, right? What kind of tools are they using? What kind of people are they interacting with? What kind of process are they currently following? Make sure that you really, really understand how they run into those problems and how they're solving the problems. And then get into like a bit of a future state discussion. So ask them like if they had a magic wand, or if they could change everything in their current world today, like what would they change within that world, and how would they change it? What would it look like? Like ideally, what would they be using in terms of tools? How much time could it take them in that future state? And who would they want to involve in that situation? And then always end up with a 10-minute wrap-up period where you actually talk through the key learnings with them and maybe do some last-minute ranking, right? So for example, current state, there might be things that come up with regards to the tools that they use, the processes that they follow. Ask them to rank, which of these are their preferred options, or which of these processes or these steps are like the most painful points. And then in the future state, given their ideas being thrown on the table, ask them for like, what would be the top 3 things that you would want solved right now? Or what would be the 3 things that you would actually use right now, right, in that ranking? And then now you got to do something with the learnings that you got from those interviews. So the first thing is you need to actually decide what you want to take away from it, or what were the key learnings from that those conversations. So the first thing is find a common themes. So as mentioned, you stop doing the interviews when you find common themes. Like people are saying the same things. Both the no's and the yeses are starting to say very, very similar things around the pain points, around what will solve those pain points. So group them into the ones that are in favor of your product idea, and then the ones that are not in favor of your product ideas, and then rank both of them based on the weights that you got from the conversations that you had. And then in this case, summarize what action items you might take, right? So if you already had a product and you were getting feedback, rank the feature changes that you would change. If you're early days in the period and you don't have like a product yet, rank the features that you think the users would use right away. And then share the results with your team, whether it's co-founders or partners or whatnot. Then you need to update your customer profiles, because this is where you're getting the insights on, okay, what kind of users are saying yes, what kind of users are saying no. And as mentioned in the beginning, this is an evolution. So you're likely going to update, if you don't have existing customer profiles already, you're going to go back and look at them and say, hey, did we get any new insight about new types of users that would say yes? Or new types of users that would actually, we should roll out in our sales effort because this would never work with them. And that's how you would abstract them into these profiles. Be ready to update them several times. So likely document these in a document that you can always go back to. So maybe it's like a Notion document or like a ClickUp document where you're just going back, updating the dimensions all the time. And then that's a good time as well to actually hypothesize any profiles you might have missed, right? So let's say you look into the characteristics beyond job titles, but maybe into behaviors like buying habits, frequency of their behaviors. Maybe there are some profiles that you might have missed beyond the ones that you've already hypothesized. And then lastly, you want to do something with the learnings. So you want to incorporate it back into what you're working on. And you might also want to start thinking about, okay, doing these interviews, surface some new questions or new assumptions that you now would want to validate in your next round of interviews. You want to keep a list of those as well. And oftentimes you'll find that more learnings creates more questions, and this is where you would document them. And then lastly, again, tying this into the lead generation type of discussion, but ask them if they want to continue to be involved in your journey here. And as we've learned, in a lot of cases, the users are like, yeah, I'm super excited about what you're working on, the problem you're solving. I really, really like align with this problem. So they'll give you your email, like just very openly. And that can be a way for you to establish your early adopters to your product. So a quick example of how you might want to think about developing an ideal customer profile based on the interviews that you've had. So some things to think about, and I know there's a lot of materials that you could also read to identify what these dimensions might be, but some things that I always want to focus on is, first of all, think about the dimensions that if someone was to share their LinkedIn profile or share their Facebook profile, what dimensions would you use to identify that these are your customers, right? And then things, it goes into things like what do they do? So what's their job title? What industry are they in? Which kinds of companies do they work in? Or what does the family look like? Are they married? Are they single? If it's important for your product. What behaviors do they share? So across all the people that said yes, for example, do they share a certain type of behavior? So for example, do they live in a particular region? Do they buy things in a certain way? Do they approach renting cars in a similar way? And that stretches into things like challenges and motivations, right? So what kind of problems do they have? Why do they run through those problems? What are their motivations? What are they trying to get done? And then, yeah, into alternatives, what do they currently use to solve these problems? Maybe it's pen and paper. Maybe it's one of your competitors. What context are they in? So, are they going to school? Are they going to work? What's the environment that they're operating in that makes them interesting, that makes them different from other people? And then how frequently do they have these problems? It's important as well. And then lastly, how much would they pay to solve it? And that's the money question. And again, you don't want to ask them, will you pay for it? But I think the question is more, have you paid to solve this problem before? And what did you pay for and how did you pay for it? Like, because that's a really good indicator. If they tell you that they usually pay 20 bucks, that's a good indicator of how much you can probably charge already as a starting point, right? But focus on what they did in the past versus what you pay. And that's actually a very enlightening point too, because I've heard from a lot of people that their customer interviews weren't very helpful because they asked whether someone will pay $50 for a shirt, but when they went to market, they priced it at 50 and no one bought it. And that's another reason why you would, again, just neutralize all the questions that comes in these interviews. Key takeaways from the discussion today. The first one is, I always say this, but get user input at any stage in your product. Right? You can talk to users at any time. Don't feel like you're constrained by the process behind the interviews, which prevents you from doing the interviews at all. And involving users as often and as early on in your product will increase loyalty and will increase a following for your product. And get user input as regularly as you can throughout your product lifecycle. So a bit about Lightster as well, and how it all fits together. We are a platform that can help you build instant user communities for feedback in seconds, and they will align with your customer profiles. And it allows you to also connect with the users for free at any time. So you don't have to think about organizing one-off sessions here and there. You can actually just chat with them at any time before and after the sessions. And DMZ program participants get free access. So that's an added benefit of the DMZ, and we've worked with several DMZ startups already. So keep in touch, and thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Yeah, feel free. Yeah. Yeah, so the API route is coming, but right now it's a separate platform that you can use to customers, like tap customers into your process, basically. You can knock on a virtual door, basically. Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Go ahead. Okay, yeah, thank you. I'm glad you asked. So we have a community of about 5,000 now. About 70% of them are in North America, 20% in Europe, and then the other 10% is distributed across South Africa. We have about 300 companies now on the platform that are exchanging ideas with their users. on a daily basis. You reach out with what you're trying to solve, right? Like you go out with, here's the problem that I'm looking to solve. Do you have this problem? If you have this problem, like let's talk, right? Like that's how I would approach it. And then I think the rewards and the incentive is more like an added benefit. So oftentimes, like let's say you try out with that approach, and you're looking at your results, and you're like, oh my god, I reached out to like 50, and I only got 2 responses. Then that probably means you need to up the incentive or the reward. And now, there's also mixed opinions about the reward component, because some people say, okay, well, you're doing customer discovery, but if you're paying them or you're offering them an incentive, does that bias the results? But actually, in my experience, people don't look at it that way. Like people look at it more as like, is this worth my time? And actually, when you pay them, in some cases, it actually removes the bias, because now you're actually going to learn the truth behind it. Like let's say you didn't have that incentive, and you reached out to someone and they just said no. Like you'll basically never understand why they said no, right? But if you're paying them, it actually says to them like, hey, like here's some incentive for you. Like tell me why you would say no. Walk me through your thinking. And because you're paying them, now there's nothing that you owe them, right? And there's something that they owe you. So it actually helps me to file that conversation. It depends on the person and what you can pay, right? Particularly, I mean, there are standard market rates out there, but for Lightster, for example, we also kind of make it vary depending on the plan that you're on. But we try to provide a consistent experience. Yeah. For your product, you mean? I think the no, actually, I wouldn't rely on the customer discovery component to understand yes or no, actually, because I view that more as ultimately a sales conversation. Like the purpose of customer discovery is actually to understand why behind their thinking, and that doesn't necessarily lead to the yes or no question, right? So a good example is like, well, when you buy clothing, right? You go out to the store and you buy clothes, like you can ask people what they do to select the clothes that they buy, but if you ask them will they buy it, I mean, they'll either say yes or no, but you actually won't ever know until you actually look at the results, right? Until this clothes hit the store, you won't ever know whether what they're saying is actually what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. Yep. 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 They're not interested. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's an interesting question, right? And I think that's why like platforms like Lightster exist as well, is because the people who are on the platform are people who are already signed up to do it. Like they're already signed up to want to share with startups. They want to see startups succeed, and that's why these are the people that when you tell them like, "Hey, I'm looking for your feedback," like they will come in. But in your scenario, that's exactly like the reason why you need to kind of use these third-party platforms, right? Because in those situations, you'll never know, like, was it the signage that was the problem? Was it the price? Was it your brand? Or was it the stuff that you were selling? You'll never know because they just kept store. So that's why I would actually recommend leveraging a platform. Just be like, hey guys, like, can you go through thinking of like when you walk past a store, what are the elements of the store that you look at? Like, do you look at the brand? Do you look at the products? And can you rank this for me in terms of what's the number one, number two, number three? And you ask that to like 20 people, and then you start to see, oh, everyone says the first thing they look at is whether the colors are like the trendy colors in the front, right? Like, and then that's where you start to like pivot your thinking. Exactly. But if you wait all the way to the end, yeah, yeah, exactly. See? Yep. Yeah, that's a great question. Like, in one of the slides, I talk about how like we got to do a lot of listening in these conversations. Like, I think that's what it comes down to. Um, and it also goes back to the need for a discussion guide, right? Because in that discussion guide, it's all about questions that are open-ended. Because all you want to do is pop up a question and just listen to the way that they talk. Even listen to like the order in which they talk about those things, right? Because that gives you a sense of what were the first things that came to their minds when they started to open their mouth to talk, and like take note of all of those when you rewatch the recordings. Because when you start doing the talking, that's where you're gonna get bad data, right? Because the more you talk about it, the more they're gonna be like, yeah, yeah, like exactly, yes, oh my god, I love that, and then now you're left with data that you can't really use or rely on, and it happens all the time, right? So yeah, yes, yeah, and I think no, and that's like the fine line between getting feedback and doing discovery versus doing a sales conversation. Because like if you're in front of like a potential customer and you're trying to sell to them, absolutely you're gonna be like, oh yeah, on the roadmap. This is coming in 2 weeks. But now when you come back to the interview or the feedback session, that doesn't matter. Like that person didn't sign up to buy your product yet, right? They're just looking to give you honest opinions about what you have to say. So I would say refrain from that. Like actually just okay, great, thanks for your feedback. Thanks for bringing this up. Because when you go back to your team, you're gonna be like, yes, like they mentioned that, like we got it, like we got on the right features. So that's how typically I would suggest doing that. Yeah, exactly. It's like great because it doesn't matter. Like they'll write it down, but then they'll be like, okay, sure, you're great. Like, yeah, thank you. And that's like $1 billion question. But like I think you're gonna do many rounds of interviews and you're gonna talk to many people. And I think it goes back to like how many people do you need to hear that from? And I think the purpose of customer discovery isn't really to give you like a finite number, right? Because there's so many factors that come into play in terms of when you should stop. Because once you find like, okay, let's say you interviewed 20 people, 18 of them said no to it. That's probably a good indicator that like you probably need to pivot. However, if you have more cash, you might have more time, and you might want to go on another endeavor to like pivot, right? And so I think it just comes down to like how many pivots can you afford. But like I mentioned, you want to select enough users that you're observing the common, right? But if you're interviewing 20 people and none of them are saying no and they're all like going in different directions, that probably means you're not segmenting your audience well enough, right? So you might need to go back and look at the way you're profiling and make sure you're getting to more specific segments. So, thanks so much. Okay, thank you. Yep. I might disappoint you with this answer, but I'd say you probably shouldn't um, think about that because, and I say that because from experience, I know there are platforms out there that are our competitors, and like I've used them throughout my whole career, and they screen people based on how well they articulate their points, how well they speak, and whether they have like a mic at home and like all of these things, just so that every single call on their platform is very high quality. But at the same time, on the other side of the equation, these people know what to say because of this process, right? They went through this application, this screening process. They know exactly, like if you put a website in front of them, the first thing they're going to talk about is the navigation. The next point they're going to talk about is like the color of the buttons. They're all going to like say, okay, the buttons are too large, the buttons are too small. But after like a few of them, you'll be like, okay, these are the users from this platform because like they went through so much to screen. Because like in the real world setting, like as you know, it doesn't really happen that way, right? Your customers are just people. They're not trained testers or humans. So I'd say like there isn't really a like an ideal profile for like a tester or like a person to provide feedback because you should actually embrace the diversity there because that is how your customers are going to go through. Like some customers are going to say nothing and then like not use your product, and then some customers are going to keep emailing you to be like, this thing is not working, and you know, so I'd say embrace the two experience there. Whatever. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So on our platform, and this is specific to Lightster, but that's the reason why we have the chat that's free all the time. So it's free form. So you can look at it as, you know, the ability to have a conversation with them organically at any time. And because of that, we've actually had users on our app who like, so in the case where the startup was looking for restaurant owners, they actually went to the restaurant to talk to the owner, but they use our app to actually make that connection. So yes, we believe in that as well. That conversation should be organic. It should happen where the context of use is. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. Cool. Good stuff. Absolutely. Yeah. So they can email me, and we're happy to offer through the DMZ connections free trials to our platform. Sounds great. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.